Welcome to Profit Led, a podcast by and for bootstrapped founders brave or crazy enough to grow a business to profitability with very few resources. Profit Led is brought to you by eWebinar, the leading automated webinar platform built to save you from doing the same webinar over and over again, from sales demos to customer onboarding to training. This season, Profit Led's host Melissa Kwan, who is also co-founder and CEO of eWebinar, will walk you step-by-step through the company's journey to $1 million. Melissa is a 3-time bootstrapper who has spent 13 years building startups. Together with co-host and eWebinar COO Todd Parmley, they will dive into one major topic per episode, sharing war stories, mistakes, and lessons learned as they grew the company to $1 million in annual recurring revenue 36 months after product launch. So buckle up, fellow bootstrappers. It's gonna be one heck of a ride.
Welcome to Profit Led Season 2, our journey to $1 million at eWebinar, episode 21. I'm Melissa Kwan, co-founder and CEO of eWebinar and your host. I'm here with Todd Parmley, my co-host, eWebinar's COO. Todd, what's up?
I'm good. You know this, but I had shoulder surgery about 2 weeks ago, so I'm wearing a gigantic sling. If I wince, it's not because of something you said, or maybe it is because of something you said, but you won't know the difference.
To give the audience some context, I guess you fell off your bike.
Yeah, I fell off my bike and I hit my shoulder and it popped my clavicle out of place. An injury I did not know existed. So they basically had to strap it down into place so it could heal back in place. That's basically what they did.
In the last episode, we talked about the importance of social selling and having a personal brand, and some of the LinkedIn strategies that I use to write content and build up my own audience. Today, we're going to talk about what it felt like when our little scrappy startup started to feel like a real business and the progression of that and what that experience was like, I guess, for the both of us, because we see it really from different perspectives. So I guess to kind of get this started, just to kind of bring the audience back to where we were from the beginning, beginning, we were really just taking an idea and making it into a real business. There wasn't any customer interviews, any testing. It was just there is a hypothesis about a business that we want to build. We think people are going to pay for it. And then we rolled it out after building it, in a silo really for a year and a half. The first people who saw it were our trial customers. We didn't have an alpha, we didn't have a beta, because I wanted to start making money from day one. So when do you think, I guess we felt like, or maybe you felt like we were actually in the game, that hypothesis was now proven and we have a real business?
I mean, I was really, when we first met way at the beginning, that was day one practically. When we first met and you shared the idea with me, it took me a minute to really wrap my head around it because it was a new idea for me, right? But by this point, once we built the product and launched it, I really understood the idea. I believed in the idea. But the first live eWebinar we did, that first training we did where chat messages were coming in and you were responding and the interactions were firing, that was the moment when I had my own aha moment. So that's when I knew there was real potential there. I'd already believed in it, but that was a really exciting moment for me. Fast forward to we launch it to this trial customers. What did we have, a 90-day trial? We had a
no, we had a 60-day trial when we rolled out, only for the first 2 months of people who signed up because we didn't have Stripe integration. What
was the churn rate of that group? It was insanely low.
No, the conversion rate of that group was 80%.
80%.
But caveat that these were we started with founder-led sales, right? So all of these were my friends, or 1 degree removed from my previous startup. So my immediate network of people I sold to were people I knew could use the product, whether they were previous customers or other startups that was serving the real estate industry that I was in. So it's not a real conversion rate per se, but it was still very good because it helped get first money in the door and show that people actually valued it.
Yeah, but that's the thing is friendship only goes so far, right? If I can't use the product, I might, give you my money for a couple months out of goodwill, but then I'm going to be I can't use this. And a lot of those customers, most of those customers are still customers today. So when that 2-month trial ended and we started we started seeing the credit card charges, that was the first sign that's like, oh, these people actually see real value in this. So that was the first moment for me.
I mean, I didn't feel like, because in the past I've had, I would say, like false positives before from, people joining beta, people paying me because I was selling the product. Like I didn't want to celebrate too quickly, I guess. Like I was still kind of taking it with a grain of salt. I guess the most common thing in startups that we say is like get like 10 unaffiliated customers. So it didn't feel unaffiliated to me yet, I guess, until I want to say like maybe month like 4 or 5, because I was really still like doing demos, pounding the phones, doing cold outreach or warm/cold outreach to like people that were referrals. So it still felt like I was selling to friends. And yeah, there were definitely people that were like, oh yeah, like I'm paying you because because you're you and I want to support an entrepreneur. I remember when we were converting those people from trials, because they were friends of mine, I individually reached out to them and said, hey, your trial's coming up. We're going to charge you on this date. If you're going to cancel, make sure you click this button. Like, I want to make sure that like I'm not taking money from them. So they had like an informed decision to do that. But it wasn't until people started finding us on their own. And we didn't have any SEO or anything. It was just like brute force marketing. Like, we were on like some review sites. We were on, Product Hunt, like people maybe saw another webinar. So, but as that was kind of coming through, that's when I was like, oh, okay, I think we have something here.
And we had a Slack channel, right? That we still do, right? That, shows when a new sign up comes in, and that started, pop up. All of us would go check immediately when somebody signed up, right?
Well, in the beginning, there would be like 20 or 30 trials a month. And
right.
That was like huge.
It was huge. So, and we saw people we didn't know. Right. We started seeing people who were like, I have no idea who that person is.
And we would ask them, where did you come from? And then, you just felt like it still felt like a super small business because you almost had like an individual relationship with each one of these people. You want to know where they came from. Did they switch from something? Was it something that made them sign up? Like we had asked all these questions, but there was like a one level up, I guess, like maybe in month 6 or 7 after the business was launched, where we were getting signups every day from different audiences. But also like, people we didn't know. So they were in theory lower quality signups because they didn't owe us anything.
Well, I mean, at the beginning, I feel like most of the people who did sign up were well qualified. They were looking for a solution like ours. But we also found out really quickly we were a new player in an existing software category that's very niche and not a lot of people know about it. Right. But for those that did, they had certain expectations about what we should have and what we shouldn't, what we should have as features. And mostly that focused around integrations. So like we started to hear like all the integrations that we needed really quick. And so we would just like pound them out.
Yeah. And there were like requests for new features, mostly like I'm coming from this, but you don't have this. These specific features, when are you going to have them? But people were still switching over because there were things that we did excel at, even if we didn't have feature parity. And having feature parity was never a goal, from the beginning. We didn't want to compete like head to head. But there was also kind of this moment where, because in the beginning we had a 30-day trial and then we lowered it to 14 fairly quickly because we realized it was just a bit too long for people to not get activated. But there were a lot more scams, right? Like people would sign up for 29 days and have another one. And we didn't have any limits. Like all of that stuff came later. So that became more apparent. Like we were useful enough for people to want to continue using us, even if they didn't want to pay. But I think there was also like, there was more detailed and deeper customer feedback as people were starting to use us more and finding the flaws and integrating us deeper into their workflow, right? Whereas they didn't really do that before.
Right. And things we just didn't know. We had no idea. So when they would point them out to us, it was like, oh, I understand why you need that. So, I mean, that was great. That's always great information.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a double-edged sword, right? When you become someone else's everyday process, like they're more sticky, right? They're less likely to churn, but now like the stakes are higher for them to use you, So when there is a complaint or when there's a feature request, like you need to do that. Otherwise, it's very easy for them to bounce back to the old solution. But there was a point where people were complaining that we didn't have certain things or we didn't do certain things very well. But they were also not leaving. In the beginning, they were leaving.
Because they needed, mostly that was around integrations. I feel like they needed an integration. And a lot of those people did come back once we had the integration because we would reach out and tell them. But yeah, people were complaining and not leaving, which was a really good sign.
Yeah. And then we were, as more and more people were starting to use us, we were experiencing like scaling issues, right? So what does that mean? Like our analytics were super slow, right? Like I think the first time we had 1,000 people in a webinar, it crashed. But that was also an indication that bigger companies were willing to take a chance on us because it was no secret that we were a small startup, especially with the first group of signups because they kind of knew where I came from. And like, I told them I was launching this during that time. So, it was like we were just kind of fixing things, I guess, as they were coming up. But it felt like because we were a real business integrated into bigger companies, it was no longer okay for us to not execute on some of that customer feedback. In the beginning, we're like, well, let's see what we're going to do. But now they're paying us more. They have more webinars and we couldn't really ignore some of the feedback from these customers.
Especially around scaling, right? It was just things that we had to fix because we had never really like tested the system on a larger scale. So those were growing pains, but David, our CTO, is amazing, and we adjusted very quickly. And when people take a risk on a new startup, they also understand that it's going to come with some of these things. So in general, there was a lot of understanding, but you're right. Once you become somebody's everyday product, they need it to work. They need it to just work.
Yeah. And I remember there was a time where we always ignored feature parity because we're like, okay, that's just a battle we can't win. Like these companies have been around for 10 years. We're brand new. Yeah. Like how can we have as much as them? But it did get to a point where we were like, okay, let's list out everything that we don't have and let's figure out how to do them, but do them better.
And some we did reject, right? Philosophically, we had some different ideas about how automation should work. Like the existing companies were trying to basically just fake a live webinar. And we're like, no, we're automating a pre-recorded webinar. So we're not trying to hide anything. We're trying to leverage the power of automation. So we did, reject certain features that we thought in what we were trying to accomplish were not appropriate or helpful or weren't something we could get behind. But yeah, we did realize at a certain point that there was a certain minimum feature set we needed to capture kind of anyone who came from a competitor.
Yeah. And a lot of that I think had to do with like integrations, right? Because they are more complex. And you can only do what right? So we collected a bunch of customer feedback. They were telling us, when I was at this platform, I could send all these data points into this particular CRM. So there was a point when we actually just did an integration overhaul. We just redid everything based on what was required. But in the beginning, we also didn't realize we knew other platforms had them, but we didn't know how they were used until people were explaining it to us. Yeah. So once we got that's when we're like, okay, that makes a lot of sense, but how can we do it better in a more flexible way? And some things I feel like even though that we're better, we're actually a bit more complex than what's out there.
It was a bit of a double-edged sword because we created a very flexible integration system, which is amazing. But for an average kind of, especially a very small company, or a single solopreneur or coach or course creator, it was beyond them.
I mean, I think like maybe a year and a half into the product launch, we started getting like actual big companies asking, if we were SOC 2 compliant, if we were GDPR compliant, like because there were these enterprise level companies that even though we were not priced at an enterprise level or offered that kind of package, they needed us to be compliant for them to even sign up a trial. And we weren't compliant at the time. It didn't make sense to invest in it because we were not profitable. We didn't have enough customers to support that. Like when one or two companies come, you're like, okay, well, we really can't do that. Some of these companies will give you like a 10-page security review document that doesn't make sense for a small startup to fill out because we don't have a lot of those things. So we just ignored it, I think, for as long as we could. But it was a good sign that companies were looking at this type of solutions, and we were a potential contender in, them using it, but they just couldn't use it because we just weren't compliant.
And there were a handful that did. A very small group did anyway because they decided that the risk was so low. So that was even a better sign, right? It was like the need was strong enough to kind of override any, because I mean, the legal risks were the data breach risks are so low for us, but with large companies, especially public companies, they don't mess around, but some did. Some were like, this is fine.
Yeah. I mean, it's at a $99 product that you can cancel anytime, where we only take a name and email to send, a follow-up to get you into the webinar. All the other data points that are collected by our customer, the user, which is their company. So from that perspective, the risk was quite low. I would say it's more normal for American companies to move ahead, but yeah, it wasn't. I guess I don't think it was. I don't think we went down that route until like after $1 million though. Like it was just too expensive. So just to give an idea of cost, and it wasn't even just a cost to get compliant. It was like, no one really knew the process. Like we had hired a GDPR consultant. I mean, consultants are the ones that make the most money when these compliance things come through, because everything's kind of gray. But we hired someone that like had a really manual process. There was 5 chunks that she suggested we do, but we could only afford to do 2. So, we redid a lot of our terms and have this, data agreements or whatnot in place. But we were like neither here nor there. So it's like we got a bit of it done, but we couldn't say we were compliant. So, and that cost was actually quite high. In the end, when we decided to do it, we went with a company called Vanta, which has software and consultants. But I would say it probably cost us like $10,000 minimum to like get started on like getting all our ducks in a row, and then another few $1,000s every quarter just to get that monitored. And then every year you have to get audited, an extra who knows how much money. So it's not something that earlier stage startups can do. And in the beginning, like when we would get security review requests, I would just say, no, like we're not doing it.
Yeah. It made no sense. I mean, we were getting enough traction with smaller companies that it would have been, it was just too early. It was too early. It was a great sign and too early. So is there anything else you could think of that like, we're still talking about like when we knew we were like when Pinocchio realized he was a real boy?
I think we talked about a lot of like the product related things, but there's certainly like a marketing mismatch, I guess. Like, so like the messaging on the first version of our website, which by the way, we made up, a lot of it we made up because we didn't have a lot of customers, didn't match the product. Like we outgrew our messaging. We outgrew our website. And, our website wasn't properly reflecting the level of product that we were. We had fake screenshots, our demo was outdated. Like we didn't have enough pages. We didn't have a feature section. Like there was so much about the product that you couldn't understand from the website. And so, we ended up going through this kind of big exercise, which we'll talk about a bit later, but like, it just seemed like super mismatched. Like we had this incredible product and then like a little dinky website that just looked very startup-y.
Yeah. And our branding was like, it felt more, it was good. It lasted for a while. Our original brand, and we still used our logo, right? Like, but it almost felt like a consumer product, right? And we really had a very powerful business product. So it needed to like just have a little bit more of a serious feel to it. It could still like have a light tone, which we still have, right? It's not like it's not like some crazy serious website, but we needed to feel more like a mature product that maybe had been around for a really long time.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, we had we invented everything. We had nothing to work off on. So I think we did really well with the lack of information. I think the first version of the website probably lasted like a little over 2 years without changing it, and our revenue was still growing. And another marketing thing was like competitors were starting to compare us in their pricing charts, and then they were starting to like copy certain parts of our product. So that was kind of interesting to see. Like we've got these little pop-up widgets and all of a sudden we go to someone else's website. Oh, there it is. It looks exactly the same. I mean, we don't buy ads, right? We spend some money on retargeting. We want to own our own traffic. But I think there was a time when like other people were buying our keyword in Google or something like that. I don't know if that's still happening, but that was.
It's not now, but that we were, it was the same thing as like discovering that our competitors were starting to notice us. People were starting to notice that we were gaining some traction, and people were starting to search for us. And so they were going to, try to, counter that by advertising using our name.
Hey, I'd like to take a second here to talk about my own company, eWebinar, and our mission to rescue people from what I call webinar hell, to give them back their time and save them literally hundreds of hours every month through webinar automation. If your sales team is tired of doing the same demo over and over for unqualified leads or worse, prospects who don't even show up, an on-demand demo powered by eWebinar can help them get their time back so they can close more deals. If you're doing customer onboarding and training on repeat, eWebinar can help you automate those so you never have to do them live again. Customer success teams are using eWebinar to run hundreds of sessions every single month without a live host. Why don't you give our product a try and see for yourself? Visit ewebinar.com to join our own on-demand demo or to sign up for a free trial. All right, now that I've gotten that on my system, let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, and also like there were competitors that were comparing us in their pricing charts, but they were only comparing our most expensive plan. So they weren't showing our cheap plan, which I thought was like kind of interesting. But it's good advertising for us, so I don't really care. I think competition is good. In fact, I think we can do with more competition. I think that would help us like educate the market. And then, as far as like listening to people coming through and realizing that we were becoming bigger, was that like there was a moment when so many people came to tell us that they signed up for us because we were cheap or we were the cheapest. But we didn't start the company to be the cheapest. We started to be the best. So when we started with a price point, we actually chose a middle price point. But when people said, oh, like this is most cost effective or this is cheapest, I think what they were meaning was this is the cheapest based on what you offer. So for me, that was a reflection of like our product growth and progression and how what we were offering was way more than what people thought they were paying for. And that's actually a bad sign for us. Like it was a sign that we were not charging enough. And that's when we were really starting to think about like, okay, where do we actually fit? And also like with the economy not doing super well and inflation, we went back to our competitor's website and a lot of people had raised their prices.
And we also had unlimited registrants, right? Which is another thing that was limited by all our competitors. And naively, we thought we could do unlimited at the beginning and realized that just wasn't it was just a mistake. It was good at the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, I think at some point it just felt like, it felt like there was a lot to do, right? We collected a lot of feedback. We kept adding to things. We had more customers, more scaling issues. I felt like we were constantly chasing like stability. Like there was a point when we were doing that. Everything felt really chaotic, but I guess the best indication of a growing company or that you have a business is that you just make more money. Like there is no better indication of that. Like we didn't spend any money on marketing. All our efforts went into marketing, but we didn't buy any leads. We tested stuff. Yeah, we tested stuff here and there. But we grew every single month. And in the beginning, like in the first couple of years, it was like 5 to 10% easy. And then of course it starts getting a bit harder. It's hard to keep up that growth rate if you're not like pumping money into it. But that was always a good sign that we were onto something. And then of course, like people were very, very rarely happens, but people would share these like raving reviews with us and how they can't imagine not having us and how, we're such an integral part of their business. And once in a while we'll hear that. And that's also kind of another indication that's like, okay, I feel like we're growing up now, even though it doesn't feel like we're moving forward. It still doesn't. It's been 5 years since we incorporated the company and it still feels new, but it's not that new. I guess we could talk a bit about like as a result of all that growth, like what we actually did, what we did to the business and what we did to the product. So as we grew, especially as we were hearing how people were choosing us because we were cheap, and that actually was coupled with like really like mind-numbing, soul-crushing support. Because people signing up because it's cheap also means that there's a certain category of customers who are usually like less tech savvy. They're starting in their business. They're more cost conscious. So we were spending a lot of time. And at that time, we didn't have a support person. So it was just like me, you, and David doing support around the clock. And, to people who wouldn't convert. So it didn't feel good to be offering such a great product to people who didn't convert, but we were attracting them. So at some point, it just didn't feel right. So I think the first thing we did was we changed pricing for the first time, which we should have done like a long time before that. But, we talk about this topic on episode 24, which is pricing mistakes, in a later episode. And we'll dive way more into this. But I didn't feel confident enough to raise prices because we weren't profitable yet. And then on the other hand, my founder friends are saying, if you want to be profitable, you have to raise your prices, especially if you're bootstrap. So that was a tough decision, but it wasn't until people were describing us as the cheapest solution that I was like, we need to get out of this because I do not want to be known by that. Like we want to be like the Ferrari of automated webinars, right? So yeah, we were just getting so many low quality signups that didn't convert. Like we wanted to remove what we call dumb support. But most importantly, we finally felt comfortable in our value to raise that price. And what we did was we doubled the price. But we doubled it from $49 to $99, and then $99 to $199, and then $199 to $299. So that wasn't really a double. And then over time, we introduced some limits, we introduced add-ons, but I think that was like a monumental change because that also put us in line with more mature software. Like we were no longer like new kids on the block startup. Like pricing it at like $100 or $200 a month is a pretty serious price point for a self-serve SaaS.
Yeah. I think we were all nervous about making that change. The net positive from that change was so obvious. The customers who had discovered our value and really were experiencing it didn't blink an eye, especially the ones that were on a higher tier. And we did scare off some of these customers that were in it for the cheapest solution possible. And our support did get easier after that. There's no question.
Yeah, I think we churned I thought there would be meaningful churn, like a lot of people getting pissed off. People were pissed off, but we knew that I was told, and this did happen, that there will be a few people who are really loud. They'll leave anyway. Even if you didn't raise your price, they'll leave anyway. And most people who value your solution, you won't even hear from them because our price point was so low. It wouldn't make a difference. Like it's not really a dent in their business. So that actually happened. Of course, the people that complained were very, very angry. But it's actually better to lose those customers. And as far as GDPR and SOC 2 reviews, we didn't do it before 1 million, but we knew we had to. So I think that was something that in the back of our mind. So we did start looking at okay, what are the requirements? And David did start to think about how to redo and restructure some of the things on the back end in preparation for that. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned we talked about this before about how we'd sort of outgrew our branding and messaging. So, how did we? I mean, I could talk about it as well. Like, how did we address that? Because you got that moving.
Yeah, I mean, we hired a company, a pretty good top branding company and design company to redo the website, specifically to look like Stripe and Monday and not like a startup. So we wanted to be like seen in the same category because we wanted people to come here and feel like this is mature, this is worth the money, and I can trust them. So it was really a trust exercise. But as far as the content itself, that also needed a lot of revamp because we didn't even have feature pages. Like you can't come here and see what kind of features we had. Like we had a big list that you could barely read. We just like slapped it on there. And then as things grew, we just put more stuff on the list. We didn't have, like we had templates already in our product, but that wasn't reflected. So it wasn't like that mobile friendly, like it was fine, but it wasn't great. So yeah, I got that started by hiring a company to do the design. But on the other hand, like you also went out to just talk to customers about how they were using our product. We reread some of those ICP exercises that we did early on. 6 months in, I did a similar exercise, just talked to a lot of top customers, got their language and put it on the site. But I would consider that really the version 1 of the site, not the one we fully made up.
Yeah. I mean, one of the greatest exercises I did, because I did new customer interviews, but you had done some as well that I had never heard. So I listened to every single one of those and literally copied and pasted, didn't like rewrite what they were saying. I copied and pasted what they actually said. It was like a sorting exercise with Post-its. I would just like put what they said on a Post-it and then started grouping them. Right. And what emerged from that was basically I created this document that I still use today, which is like what are 3 primary use cases we're doing before they used eWebinar, the pain that they were feeling, and then what they experienced after and how things changed and what they got as a result of using it. And that, and tried to keep it as much in their specific words as much as possible. And so that document as well became a really like powerful source of content for the new website.
The other thing that we did, which I almost forgot as you're talking about this, is around the same time, Anthony Pieri, now known for homepage content, I guess he writes a lot on LinkedIn. His company's called Fletch, and all he writes about is like how to write homepage content. We hired him to do our homepage, to like rewrite the content of our homepage with the exercise that we ran with customers. They don't do interviews. They will take the content that we give them and structure a page such that it converts people to whether it's a trial or a demo. So we really learned a lot from him and his philosophies as to how you would write not just homepages, but actually every page. So not very different than when we hired Grow and Convert to teach us how to write articles.
Which is not the same. It's so funny. It's like, you sort of think like marketing writing is all the same, but it's just not.
I mean, website writing is a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, it's completely its own thing.
And even website writing, like product messaging on each page is also a different ballgame. Like he only does homepages. I think we forced him to do a case study page, but he doesn't do that anymore. But outside of that, I think like the other things we had to do to our business was we really had to focus on scaling our platform. Like, because the thing is, David and the team can't be around 24/7. So we have customers from all over the world. So if there's a huge webinar in India, for example, like no one's around for that. And so if that crashes, they get really upset. Like people get really upset, right? So we really spend a lot of time working on like the loading speed and, how to scale our chat if there's a lot of people in the room at the same time. Security also, forgot about that because as as you get bigger, people try to hack your system. But also, how do you do this in a way that doesn't break the bank? Because if I have a lot of people on my platform now, I need another server, but I don't need that all the time. But if that's just running, like I think there was a point when I was like, why is Amazon like $10K a month? Like it's so expensive. So then, we had to figure out a way to spin up and down servers depending on the usage so that we can bring that cost down. So that was actually when we started looking at like, what is the true cost of a webinar? And then we started introducing limits, because then it turns out we were basically paying our biggest accounts to actually use us.
Yeah, right. We were losing money on the people that I think kind of knew they were abusing us. Like they knew that they were pushing it to the limit.
Yeah, I mean, like just to give some context, like every single streaming platform, webinar platform has a limit on number of attendees or number of viewers, because actually what you're paying for is bandwidth for the stream. We did not have that. So if you're coming from a platform that's like, whoa, unlimited streaming, and we didn't even have a file size limit. Like you could upload a 20 gig file. We would be hosting it, whatever you want, play it 100,000 times, and we would still charge you like $200. So that was not, so that didn't work.
Yeah, we limited file size. This came a little bit later, but we really limited what you could do in a trial, because it was like, we're going to give you enough that you can genuinely experience our product, but we're not going to give you enough where you can like quickly run some webinar, make money off of it, and then start up a new trial and do it over and over and over again. So we figured it out. Took a minute.
I think as we grew, one of the things that were most telling about us becoming a real business was stuff started to feel less chaotic, because we were being so reactive. Like something happened, we fix it. Something happened, we fix it. Oh my God, this thing crashed. We have to spin up another server. But instead, we became way more proactive in planning where we were going. We, instead of focusing on priorities once a month, we did it every quarter. So we could feel progress, because before that, it was just like, okay, what's next? What's next? We were able to, because we made more money and we were burning less and we were almost profitable at that point, we were able to move slower. It was such an earned luxury, right? We were able to move slower, be more intentional, and then align where we want to focus our time, what features we want to build to the business goals that we have. So whether that's like, how do I get more of this ICP, this ideal customer profile, or how do I make more money in an add-on, or how do I prime the system so I can do this thing next? And it just felt like a way more structured business. Whereas before that, it was just like, okay, let's get this customer. This customer wants this. Let's do that too. So all of that kind of went away.
Yeah. And a part of that proactive, being able to be more proactive instead of reactive, is the customer feedback we were listening to was reactively in support, right? It was like, right. And then we started actually going out to customers and say, hey, can we interview you? Can we talk to you about your process? Can we understand how you're using eWebinar better? And so we were able to build a roadmap thinking in terms of a roadmap that came in without like quarterly planning, right? We actually had a vision for what we would do next, instead of being like, just fix it.
I think that this is a good place to wrap up. I think we talked about, it's so hard to think, it's so hard to remember these things because it was so long ago. But it's so exciting when you have an idea, you bring it into fruition, and someone buys it. Like that, I think, is like my favorite feeling in the world. I don't so much like running a business, but I love the hunt, right? I love the creation. I love the hunt. I love the first sale. And then when you have to run it, it's a little less exciting, but I love that new feeling.
The only slight tweak I would make to that statement is not someone buys your product, but a stranger buys your product. It's like, I don't know who you are, but this thing that I've created, you find value in it enough to give me some money for it. So, well, let me just recap what we covered today. We talked about when eWebinar started to feel like a real business, right? And not like a side hustle or something. Things we did as a result because of that, like changing our pricing, being more proactive instead of reactive. And then how we needed to kind of up our game as a result, how our change to the business, how our approach to the business changed because of this clear message we were receiving that we needed to up our game. So with that in mind, what's your hot take for today?
My hot take is you never feel like you know what you're doing because you're facing problems that you've never faced before. Like that is literally the definition of like, you don't know what you're doing. Right. And like myself, you and David has never built a company like this of this size. I have had a couple startups before, but not of this size and not like a self-serve SaaS product. So all of these things we're talking about, scaling issues, like I was never big enough in my last startup to hit scaling issues. Like I've always wondered what people meant by scaling issues. So yeah, I think it's normal to feel like you don't know what you're doing because you've never done it before. But it's really exciting to face those things, and because it's an indication of growth, right? And even when you feel like you're not progressing, when you're feeling those and experiencing those issues, you are growing. And I think it's something to celebrate, right? It's like something that we forget. Like we feel like we're in this rat race, this hamster wheel, but it's awesome to have these issues that you can solve. It's a first world problem. What's your hot take?
I mean, mine's very similar to that, which is that, when you in that space where like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like I'm responding to what's happening, but I'm figuring it out I'm figuring it out as I go. We're figuring it out as we go. That can be really scary and feel like you're doing something wrong. And I mean, I would say from our experience, that is not the case, because I feel like there was a point where we started to realize, oh, this is going to continue to happen where we feel like we don't know what we're doing, but we started trusting ourselves enough to know that we would figure it out. Right. And so it became more exciting and less scary because it was like, oh, here's a problem to solve. Let's figure it out. Right. It became, as we started having, wins with the things we were like, oh, we tried something we didn't know how to do, and then it worked. Then we did get better and better at that. Though every time you come across the thing you don't know how to do, you're just like, I don't know how to do this.
If you've been enjoying this podcast, I've got a small favor to ask. The only way Profit Led grows is by word of mouth. So if you'll do us a favor and hit the subscribe or follow button wherever you're listening or watching this podcast right now, it'd mean the world to us and help us continue to spend time making these episodes for you. Ping me on LinkedIn if there are particular topics you want us to get into this season. Send me any feedback you have on this podcast because I love hearing from you. My name is Melissa Kwan, last name spelled Kwan. To get notified of new episodes, join our mailing list by going to profitled.fm. I promise to only share things you'll actually care about. Thanks for listening. Bye now.